We are recording.
Good evening, and welcome to the State of Indiana Gubernatorial Candidate Forum. My name is Stephanie Terry, and I am the Indiana State Coordinator of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated is a private, not-for-profit organization whose purpose is to provide assistance and support through established programs in local communities throughout the world. Through nonpartisan social action efforts, we promote leadership, advocacy, and empowerment to affect social change and public policy. On behalf of the State of Indiana chapters of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, Indiana chapter of the NAACP, and the African American Coalition of Indianapolis, we would like to thank you for joining us tonight. Before hearing from our candidates, we'd like to briefly acknowledge and thank the Planning Committee for tonight's forum. Ronnie Ford, a member of the Indianapolis African American Coalition and Delta Sigma Theta Sorority. Robert Shegog, President and CEO of the Indianapolis Recorder. Barbara Bowling Williams, State President of the Indiana chapter of NAACP, and Diane Clements Boyd, Indiana State Social Action Coordinator of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Our format for this evening is as follows. First, a discussion with Governor Eric Holcomb that will be moderated by Tina Cosby. Ms. Cosby is a veteran broadcast communications professional and the Community Affairs Director for the Indianapolis radio station, Radio 1, and daily talk show host of Community Connection on AM 1310, The Light, and 92.7 FM. We are so pleased to have her with us this evening. Following the discussion with Governor Holcomb, we will have a discussion with Dr. Woody Myers, moderated by Bianca Merritt. Dr. Merritt is a founding director of the Center for Research on Inclusion and Social Policy at the Indiana University Public Policy Institute. And she is the clinical assistant professor at the O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. Her work involves working with a multidisciplinary team of analysts and students to understand the intersection of public policy and equity in Indianapolis. The moderators will take questions from the viewing audience as time permits. At this time, we'd like to invite representatives from our partnering organizations to give brief remarks. Willis?
Good evening. I'm Willis Bright, chair of the African American Coalition of Indianapolis, a collaboration of more than 22 independent social, civic, civil rights, religious, ministerial, and community service organizations. We welcome you, as with our partners, to this gubernatorial candidate forum. AACI was created more than 15 years ago to further engage the Central Indiana African American community in the political process at all levels of government and civic life. Voter registration and candidate forums such as tonight's have been priority activities throughout AACI's history. We hope what you learn tonight will inform your actions during the upcoming elections, both Indiana and nationally. Please vote early, take or drive others to the polls so we will have the largest number and the highest percentage of African Americans who have ever voted in Indiana. Thank you, Governor Holcomb and Dr. Myers, for your participation in this forum. We look forward to working with whichever administration is ultimately elected by the citizens of Indiana. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, at this time, we'll have our first discussion. Ms. Cosby?
Good evening. I am Tina Cosby, Community Affairs Director at the Indianapolis stations of Radio 1 and host of the show Community Connection on AM 1310, 92.7, and now our all-new 95.1 FM The Light. It is a pleasure to be here, and I would like to thank the organizing committee for the invitation to join this very important forum. My portion of the program is going to go very, very quickly. It's brief. So I will be very much to the point, and I will let you kick things off right now because you are the man of the hour, I guess the man of the next 30 minutes or so, Indiana Governor Holcomb. So Governor Holcomb, let's get right to it. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Tina. It's so good to be with you and with everyone else who's following along virtually. Obviously, I think we all would have preferred to join together in person, but we'll do that just as soon as it's safe to do so. Also wanted to send my shout outs and thank yous to the Planning Committee as well, to the State of Indiana chapters of Delta Sigma Theta. And Stephanie, thank you. And Willis, thank you, at the African American Coalition of Indianapolis, and to the Indiana chapter of the NAACP for all coming together and making this just such a worthwhile discussion. I know there's a lot of topics, very important. I'll cut to the chase because we've got a lot to go over, but things that people, are really thinking about: education, environment, our economy, the pandemic. And I'm assuming, Tina, you will lead us to those topics of discussion, and I'm ready to get at it.
How interesting. You should mention that, Governor. Let's start right there with the big topic of the world, actually. Indiana has experienced over 3,500 deaths due to the coronavirus pandemic. Initial cases and deaths disproportionately affect Black Hoosiers, while current trends indicate substantial disparities in deaths for Latino Hoosiers. As of September 25th, Indiana is now at stage 5 of its reopening plan. Businesses are open at full capacity with CDC recommended precautions such as mask wearing and social distancing. Friday, October 9th, Indiana marked a single day record high of 1,832 new cases of COVID-19. If this negative trend continues, what are your specific plans to reduce the number of COVID-19 cases in the state overall, as well as for communities of color?
Yep. That's what's on everyone's minds. You're right, spot on, as usual, Tina. And I will just say that we'll continue to let the data drive all of our decisions, and we've done that from the very outset and from day one. And we knew that we could go to stage 5. It's important that our economy does remain open to the extent that it can safely. And what we're seeing with more testing and with more tracing, what we're seeing is where the origin of where these surges are occurring and where these cases are occurring, whether it be in Marion County, Vanderburgh County, Elkhart, or St. Joe County. And then we're able to even go deeper and see surgically where they're happening. And what we're finding out is there is proof that we can operate safely. Businesses have been doing it for months now. We had a very high unemployment rate. As you can recall, just a few months ago, it was adjusted all the way up to 17.5%. It's down to 6.4% right now, which is double where we were in January or February. But that is allowing us to do other things. And it is making sure that not just the economy's open, but it's making sure that we can address those needs of who needs it the most. So knowing that we can do it, we're seeing that our schools, we have a 97.2% rate of schools open for some in-class instruction. So proving again that it can happen. And what we don't want to happen is that the state does, and it needs to be the last resort, but shut down again. What we're seeing through our tracing efforts is, it's anecdotally and through tracing, it's funerals and weddings and house parties, and it's where we let our guard down and just assume that it won't, this ghost of a virus that's invisible won't get us, and we're around trusting people. So we have to be ever vigilant about washing our hands, physically distancing, wearing a mask. Those things work, and they can bring those numbers down. It's when you experience this fatigue, and I know, we're all feeling it, that we thought maybe a month into this or 2 or 3, we need to be prepared to be at this and vigilant as long as COVID-19 is with us. Now, I'm very proud of Catalent, who is working on a vaccine. I'm very proud of Roche, who's helping with testing equipment. I'm very proud of Eli Lilly working on a vaccine. So vaccines and therapeutics, very important, but those are down the road. And until then, it is our personal behaviors, each and every one of us, that makes a difference in that spread.
So Governor, at what point would you be concerned? Because when you made the announcement for the state to be able to transition to,
Sure.
to stage 5.0, I believe the 7-day positivity rate was something like 3.5% or something
You're
around.
right.
And then on the day that we had the record number, October 9th, I believe it was like 5.1%, if I'm
You're
correct. Okay, so at what point, I mean, the trend, what you're saying is that this trending upwards is to be expected. Okay, given that, at what would the number be? Or do you have a threshold as to where you'd start to say, okay, maybe I need a little bit more intervention here? Do you have a threshold?
Sure. There's multiple factors, not just that one positivity rate or that 7-day positivity rate, because there are 92 different counties. That rate is different in all those counties and in districts. But we do look at the positivity rate for sure. And we look at the district, and we look at the ICU bed, negative airflow room capacity, and the ventilator capacity, and a lot of other numbers to make sure that we have the capacity to care for those who need the care. And what we're seeing is, while it has spiked, what we have to do is meet a surge with a surge of changed behavior. And we're working very closely, like we have with our schools, who, by the way, a lot of kudos have to go out to our school administrators, principals, superintendents, students, parents, because they're playing by the rules. And we're not, this is nationally as well, not just the state of Indiana. We're seeing a below 1% positivity rate in a lot of our schools across the country. So they're proving it. Some of our smallest and largest employers have a very low positivity rate. But to answer your question, we'll look at a whole, there's a myriad of factors that go into deciding whether a county, like we did early on in this process with Marion County or Cass County, exceeds that overall threshold, and then the state needs to come in. But we're working with locals right now. It has to be a partnership for this to work. Simply, the state of Indiana, it would be fantasy to think that the state of Indiana could go in and monitor every wedding and funeral and house party and backyard picnic where spread does occur. And so we have to appeal to the sensibilities and the good nature of Hoosiers to truly work together on the ground. We know that a few things work, and masking up is one of the big ones.
One more COVID question. COVID-19 has negatively affected the economy nationally and in Indiana. As of August, over 6% of Hoosiers were unemployed, with Black Hoosiers experiencing unemployment at a rate of 15.6%. Yet, even during strong economic times in the state, Black Hoosiers are consistently unemployed at twice the rate of white residents. Governor, what would you do to ensure better employment for all Hoosiers, as well as to reduce the racial disparities in employment?
This is something I'm passionate about. It's something that I wake up every single day and look forward to seeing progress being made. Tina, you mentioned our unemployment rate down to 6.4 right now, but that is still double what it was in January, February of this year. What we have seen that works and what we have moved more resources toward are our workforce development programs. They work. And, I just checked again today if you go to indianacareerconnect.com, you will see a list of 109,000 unfilled jobs throughout the state of Indiana. So we're looking to grow. The state of Indiana is looking to grow. We have already brought in this year, during a global pandemic, almost 25,000 new job commitments coming in over this year, next year, and the year after. They're an average wage of $27.65, all 25,000 of those jobs. What we need to do is connect people who are looking for, those are careers, not jobs, by the way. We need to connect people who are looking to skill up and fill those jobs. And oftentimes it means a certificate or a credential. It means if you'll put in the time, the state of Indiana will pay 100% to skill you up in a high wage, high demand field. And every time I hear the story of someone who says, boy, I thought my time was behind me, or I was over 50, I didn't think I'd be able to skill up, or I didn't think I'd be able to afford it. And they go to nextleveljobs.com and they figure out where all these jobs are available and how the state of Indiana can help. When you see thousands and thousands and thousands of Hoosiers who are right now during this global pandemic. And so we moved from the CARES Act dollars more financial resources toward those programs, and we're going through it. And by the way, the Black community has experienced 15% of the filling of those, getting those certificates and credentials. So once again, it's showing that the population, 9.8%, 15%, we're overperforming where there is awareness and access to these programs. And that's what that's how you economically empower anyone to be able to determine what their own destiny is making sure they have the tools to succeed. And fortunately, when our economy is growing, we have the ability, like we do here in the state of Indiana, to move those resources into education and into training. And so that's maybe a long-winded or a very condensed version, depending on how you look at it, answer to how do we start to disproportionately in a positive way affect economic and employment outcomes for our African-American neighbors in the state of Indiana. It works. I want more people to take part of it, and it's there.
So in terms of bridging that gap, that disparity gap, what you're saying is these programs, these state programs will do that? Because
absolutely,
you've got
they are doing it.
Twice as many. But basically there's no particular program that is established to address specifically the African-American unemployment rate, which is twice the white.
Absolutely there is. Nextleveljobs.com.
Okay.
And we moved and we literally moved $50 million, $37 million into employers and employees. And then we carved out money only for the minority community. And what we saw is, in terms of employees, 15% are taking advantage of those opportunities that are there for them. And by the way, employers have a twin program at Next Level Jobs, and that's working as well. There's 84 minority businesses, Black-owned businesses, that have taken part of this program during this global pandemic, about $3.8 million that have gone directly to those minority-owned businesses. And believe me, there will be more. When we go through that, that's a good thing. This is what I said about Next Level Jobs that was available to everyone when we started it a couple of years ago. I said, this works. We need to do more that works. And when you hear from an individual that has skilled themselves up and they said, the most important thing is not that I have this credential and I doubled my income, but now I know where to get the next one and the next one and the next one. And then that is a true pathway to upward mobility.
Governor, I want to pivot to education, which you mentioned a few moments ago. In the state of Indiana, 92% of students in the state are enrolled in public schools, with students of color more likely to attend them. But public schools only received a 2.7% increase in the most recent state budget, while non-public schools received a 25.2% increase during that same time. Indiana public school teachers and administrators also visibly requested increases in teacher pay and other forms of support. Please address how Indiana can create more equitable funding for schools, especially those serving marginalized communities of color.
Yes. Another, as you mentioned again, Tina, not pandering, you're just hitting on all my important points here as well, because this is foundational. And we actually have a lot to be proud of in the state of Indiana, especially in comparison to other states. We devote over half of our total state budget to education. We're one of the top 3 states in the country on that front. That's our state funding. And then of course, as everyone knows, there's some local funding and there's some federal funding that goes into that one pot. We were able to, since I was sworn into office, we were able to add to that a record historic investment, an increase in funding of $1.6 billion into that bottom line that goes into public K through 12 into that space. In addition to that, we paid off $150 million local school liability so that the administrators could devote that savings, their local savings, into teacher paychecks. And they did that. They were true to their word. And then with that historic increase in funding, they also came to myself and to the General Assembly and they said, we hear you. If we get this increase, we're going to get that to teachers' paychecks. And they did. I also said, we're not done. We're on the right path. We're moving in the right direction. And I say this not because I'm the son of a public school teacher who I had in the 3rd grade. I said that's when I learned life wasn't going to always be fair. But we then said, how do we further in a sustained way get more funding into the K through 12 space so that we're actually attracting teachers from our neighboring states? I want to be, one of the best top 3 in the Midwest and not lose teachers, good teachers, to other states if finances are a consideration for them specifically. And so we created the Teacher Compensation Commission that came together and said, we're going to look long-term at a lot of different revenue sources. And they started this earlier this year. They'll be done by December so that the public, myself, the General Assembly can all look at various options to better devote and streamline and get that funding into our equation long-term, because this is hundreds of millions of dollars. We proved we could do this when we brought superintendents and principals, union members, the public, parents all together this past session when we passed that record increase. And oh, by the way, during the global pandemic, there probably is other states out there that did this, but you may recall I stepped out and said, with all that teachers and school administrators are going through, and even though I went to our state agencies and said, I'm going to need to see 15% a reduction across the board in your agencies, we said that we're going to protect 100% of K through 12 funding. Very important, isn't happening around the rest of the country, but that just reflects our commitment now, and as I said, going forward, to fund the foundation, and that is our children's education and training, because we're living in a pretty exciting time, but it also means we're living in a lifelong learning scenario. And so, doubling On My Way pre-K, allowing it to go into 92 counties, not just 5, sending more dollars for school safety, making sure we pushed $61 million into schools so they could get better connected via the internet, students and teachers, et cetera. So we'll continue to make these type of investments in counselors as we go forward. But this is a pre-K through happy retirement investment, and it's got everything to do with about properly funding our education and our training efforts.
There's some that still are disproportionately funded and still need quite a bit of help. The upcoming legislative session is the long session, and it's also a budget year. Is there anything that you'd like to share with us in regards to that? Something more than what you have just said, especially for those schools that are underserved and desperately in need of additional funding.
Sure, this is exactly the time, Tina, that we have this discussion about the complexity index and the foundational dollars and what we contribute. And to say, I am proud of what we're devoting to public school education, being in the top 3, over half of our budget going toward education. That's exactly where we have this discussion, is in the General Assembly every budget session. And so I think my record reflects that I have led on this to bring in record increases in our funding of K through 12 public school education, and am looking for ways to do even more. Here's what we do. We look at a challenge and we say, out of that challenge, here's the goal. Now, how do we solve it? And we have a really good track record of making progress when we take that approach. And by the way, that's a bipartisan open door policy to make progress like we've made over the last 4 years.
Governor, I'm going to try to get one more question in, because I know my good colleague, my new good friend, Dr. Merritt, is anxiously waiting. But I do have one final question here. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, Jacob Blake are just a few of the most recent visible cases of Black citizens who have been killed or seriously injured by law enforcement. Studies show that Black Americans are more likely to be killed by the police and be disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system. So the question here is, do you believe that there is a culture that allows for systemic racism in law enforcement? Why or why not? And what would you do to address these disparate experiences?
Yeah, I'm trying to lead by example again. This is something, again, that I'm pretty personally passionate about, and I want to make sure that the state of Indiana leads by example. And that is, I'm very proud of our law enforcement officials at the state level and all that they've been able to do over the years. And that's exactly why we said, look, let's learn from modern techniques and have a third party reviewer come in and do an assessment of our training academy. We've made a lot of progress on our own in the recent past. We've already doubled our graduation rates in the minority community out of our academy, out of our training academy. We went from 14% in the matter of a few years to 28%. And so we're going to do that, look under the hood, see what practices there are. If there's ways we can improve, we're going to fund body cams on our law enforcement officials, those frontline law enforcement officials. That's for a couple reasons, by the way. That's for one, having that additional perspective, but two, helping us train. It's kind of a no-brainer that if you're able to review how you train, like in the military, you can not make certain mistakes in the future, learning from watching what you actually did, not what you maybe think you did. And so that's another reason why I want to make sure that that is completely transparent. We've got the third party lined up. They're going to be doing that assessment. In addition to that, we said, look, and I'm surrounded by an incredible team of professionals, many of which are very diverse, by the way, and cabinet level officials. And we brought together a task force of our overall cabinet and said, look, we've got to hire one person at the cabinet level, and they're going to be Indiana's first ever Chief Equity, Inclusion, and Opportunity Officer that will have authority to ensure that we're raising our game, that we're removing barriers that are holding some people back. This has to do with training. It has to do with procurement. It has to do with everything across every agency. And we want to make sure, again, that in addition to working on sentencing reform and jail overcrowding and all those issues that we'll work on in the General Assembly come January in that long session, that we're also making sure that our agencies are a model for the country. I think there's only one other state out there that is devoting as much attention and resources in this space to make sure that truly Indiana is one Indiana for all.
So to follow up, is it your belief that there is a culture of systemic racism in law enforcement?
There is not in my mind. There is areas of improvement, and there are bad apples in every profession. And we need to make sure that we root out those bad apples because they affect everyone else, whether it's a politician or a preacher or a law enforcement official. And I can tell you, there is racism out there across America and across the world for that matter. What we have to do is show that we're better than that. And we can be part of the solution to form that more perfect union and therefore a more perfect Indiana.
Governor, they told me I have I have one more minute, or a couple of more minutes for a final question. This one's a quickie, I think, maybe.
Sure.
Maybe not. Nationally and in Indiana, Black Americans are least likely to be homeowners and are more likely to rent and experience homelessness due to decades of housing discrimination and segregation in housing. The CDC cites stable housing as a vital tool to control the coronavirus. So we'll circle back to that, allowing residents to shelter in place and work and learn from home when possible. An eviction moratorium was initially granted and recently expired in Indiana to ensure renters could have stable housing during the pandemic. Now, if you are elected to another term, what would your plan be for Indiana residents who are experiencing housing instability, especially those who are experiencing difficulty due to the coronavirus pandemic?
Yeah, again, very important. It's another one of those foundational health and well-being, quite frankly, issues that I'm proud of our housing department. Our lieutenant governor oversees that in her portfolio, and they've been very creative about. They've rolled out in just this year in 2020 6 different affordable housing projects that are out there, and other programs where it helps people buy their first home in partnership with our federal entities. Indiana, by the way, is ranked 3rd in terms of housing affordability, and we have a higher home ownership rate, about almost 73%, compared to almost 68% of the nation. We did devote some CARES dollars to make sure that we were protecting those folks who are going through this, about $40 million. That's in addition to what Marion County received directly from the federal government for this very reason as well. But we're going to continue to, our IHCDA, our Housing and Community Development Authority, will continue to look at, and they've done tests on this. They've gone out and said, in partnership with the Indiana Civil Rights Commission, and said, we're gonna do some tests on discrimination faced by Hoosiers in the rental market on race and disability and families with children. And they've completed those lists, and then they're able to circle back and address those. Also, in the first quarter of next year, the IHCDA, again, the Housing, Community and Development Authority, will also conduct a racial equity impact assessment. That's something that's ongoing right now, and it's got to do with all of our housing policies, institutional practices and programs and plans to reduce and eliminate ultimately and prevent racial discrimination and inequities in housing. So once again, we're creatively forming up partnerships and completing projects that are getting at this. And that requires a partnership with our local government officials and our federal government officials. And that's how we're able to obviously accomplish the most gain, whether it's here in Marion County or cleaning up lead contamination in East Chicago. We had to bring everyone together and once again, have a good track record of that and look forward to one to come.
Governor, we've come to the end of our time together, and there's another man of the hour waiting as well. I would love to thank you again. Thank you so much for sitting down with us and talking. I am now going to turn things over to Dr. Bianca Merritt. Dr. Merritt is the director of the Center for Research on Inclusion at IUPUI. Dr. Merritt is standing by with Democratic gubernatorial hopeful Dr. Woody Myers. Good evening, Dr. Merritt.
Good evening, Tina. Thank you for passing it on over to me.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks again to all of our hosts, for Governor Holcomb as well, for your time with us. And we're looking forward to passing the baton over to this side and engaging Dr. Myers. Dr. Myers, how are you?
I'm great. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound wonderful. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Merritt.
Yes. Would you like to start off by sharing a few comment statements about yourself and you're joining us here today?
Well, again, I too appreciate all of the efforts that went into creating this wonderful forum here today. The coalition that brought this together is an amazing group of people who continue to do great work in a variety of areas through their organizations in the state, and I'm appreciative of the opportunity to stand before you or sit before you on Zoom. I wish we could do this live and answer questions and offer my thoughts on where the state should go. I am a physician. I'm the former state health commissioner here in Indiana. I was born and raised in this state, and I'm a third generation Hoosier. All of those things are important, but I think probably most important for me is the 30 years of experience I've had in leading organizations and moving organizations to challenge the status quo, to do things differently, to make things happen, create action plans. In addition to that, the experience I've had as a physician caring for patients in the intensive care unit, all those things have led me to the conclusion that Indiana can do so much better than we're doing today. But I think the overriding issue for me, Dr. Merritt, is the fact that I am now not just a father of 5, but a grandfather of 2. I believe that my grandchildren and yours ought to inherit a better Indiana, and that we ought to solve the problems that our generation either created or should solve, so that their generation can solve the next set of problems going forward. That's how it's supposed to work. And so that's why I'm running for governor here in my home state today.
Great. Well, thank you so much for giving that background information about who you are and why you're running for governor. So we're going to kick off with kind of the question of the year on the topic of the year, talking a little bit about COVID-19. So as you probably know, Indiana has experienced at this point over 3,500 deaths due to the coronavirus pandemic. Initial cases and deaths disproportionately affected Black Hoosiers, and currently we're seeing substantial disparities in deaths and cases for Latino Hoosiers. As of September 25th, Indiana is now at stage 5 of its reopening plan, and businesses are open at full capacity with CDC recommended precautions like mask wearing and social distancing. But on Friday, October 9th, Indiana marked a single-day record 1,832 new cases of COVID-19. So if this negative trend continues and you are elected governor, what would your specific plans be to reduce the number of COVID-19 cases in the state overall, as well as for communities of color?
Well, Dr. Merritt, Friday was indeed a high mark, and people should understand that that number of almost 1,900 was since the beginning of the pandemic. In other words, we are now worse off in terms of the new cases per day than any single period of time since we began measuring the number of cases from the beginning. It wasn't an isolated day. The whole week, the last couple of weeks has been full of record numbers, including today's numbers. So we are not only experiencing a record number of new cases, the positivity rate of those cases is going up as well. You know, the World Health Organization very specifically says that for economies to reopen, there needs to be a decreasing number of new cases. Ours are increasing, and that the positivity rate needs to be below 5%. And now for unique individuals, ours is running closer to 10%. So clearly stage 5 is the wrong stage. There are only 5 stages. 5 is the most open. And so instead of moving us in that direction, I think it would have been much safer, much smarter to move us in the other direction so that we could reduce the number of new cases. And by reducing the number of new cases, we reduce the number of deaths, we reduce the number of hospitalizations, we reduce the number of people who go to funerals, who suffer, who see loved ones suffer. All of those things are tragic, and we can prevent them. And if we were to engage in the strategies that are required prior to the time that we get an effective vaccine. So what would I do differently? Number one, I would have a true mask mandate in Indiana. Now, masks aren't perfect. Everyone knows that, but they're really a lot better than not wearing anything at all. And we know that the data from all of the scientific studies shows that decreasing the spread of the virus through containing the droplets that contain the virus from breathing, from singing, from coughing, from sneezing are very, very important. That's an important method that you can use to protect not just ourselves, but our loved ones and others as well. And in Indiana today, I think we have more of a mask suggestion than a mask mandate. A mandate means that if you don't do it, then there's a penalty of some sort for it. There's a consequence. And it's the same way, Dr. Merritt, we were about 10 years ago when we said that people can't just light up their cigarette around you, that was wrong and we needed to stop it. And we did. We put in a mandate to stop it in public. And then a few years later, what we decided was that seatbelts were required to protect not just yourself, but to protect other people. You couldn't put your kids in the back of the pickup truck and run it down the road at 40 miles an hour and turn them into missiles when you hit your brakes fast. And because of that, we save lives. And we need to do the same thing now. There needs to be a penalty such that law enforcement and others can gently remind people. We don't want to throw people in jail for not wearing a mask. That's not the goal. It's to remind people that there is a consequence and that some people, unfortunately, need that reminder. So we need to do that, and that's what will happen in Myers-Lawson administration. We'll give different advice to our schools. I think it's a lot safer to cut back until we have a vaccine and on the in-class learning. We can continue to do distance learning as long as we continue to provide the hardware and the software. and the Wi-Fi, of course, for our children to be able to utilize, which is certainly another big issue. That's the fact that broadband internet is not available in all parts of our state. 30 years now since the internet was instituted. So all of those are things that I would do very differently than the current than my opponent, the current governor, and I would do them also utilizing what I would consider to be the pulpit that being a governor offers. I would go around the state and I would talk to people and help them to understand directly why this is important, why we need to modify our behavior. And yeah, there'll be some folks that don't appreciate it and don't like it. And yes, there will be some businesses that will be adversely affected, but the greater good needs to be the protection of human life. And in a Myers-Lawson administration, public safety and public health will come first.
So to be clear, you would be open to having businesses open, because that's been the whole conflict, across the state, is economy versus health. And so you're saying you would support mask wearing in addition to businesses being open, or closed businesses and mask wearing?
It's not whether or not businesses are open, it's whether or not you can safely congregate. And certain businesses will require us to behave differently than other businesses. The best examples, of course, are movie theaters. Yeah, I would love to go back to the movie theater and see the blockbuster, but we're going to have to put the pause button on that for a while. And then restaurants and bars, particularly where our young people frequent. Our younger folk sometimes believe they're immune before we get a vaccine to all of the maladies of life, and they tend to let their guard down, as we've seen in a lot of our colleges and universities. So those are the places that we should selectively target. That doesn't mean that all of the bakeries baking bread and all of the meat processing plants and so on need to shut down. No, that's not it at all. We need to make sure that the workers there are protected and that they're maximizing the use of personal protective equipment, taking all the reasonable precautions. So the goal is not to shut businesses down. The goal is to make it safer for people until we have a vaccine, until we have immunity. And that means changing our behaviors, changing the way we congregate until that time occurs.
Thank you. Related to that, since we're talking about COVID-19 and the economy, we know that there has been a negative effect on our economy nationally as well as in Indiana. As of August, over 6% of Hoosiers were unemployed, with Black Hoosiers experiencing an unemployment rate at about 15%. Yet, even during strong economic times in the state, Black Hoosiers are consistently unemployed at twice the rate of white residents. So what would you do if elected to better ensure employment for all Hoosiers, as well as to reduce racial disparities in employment?
Well, COVID has exacerbated changes that have been present for decades. Let's not kid ourselves. It's not since February only that African-American Hoosiers, Latinx Hoosiers have had disproportionate problems with employment. This has existed for a long, long time, and previous administrations and this administration have not done enough, anywhere close to enough to address it. There are shorter term and longer term issues that need to be considered. There are local, state, and federal solutions. Let's talk about what the state of Indiana can do. We have in the state of Indiana today some guidelines on women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses participating in contracts that the state offers, but we don't have any clarity at all as to whether or not the companies that are winning those contracts are employing those businesses and what their commitment is. And in Myers-Lawson administration, we'll make that information very public, and we'll applaud those companies that do a great job, and we'll applaud those businesses that are brought into the fold because of the quality of services they offer to our state. And then we'll point the light at those that aren't and ask a lot of questions as to why they aren't, to make sure that we get the progress that we need. There's nothing like shining the light of day on a problem to see to it that things begin to change, and we'll do that. In addition, we'll make sure that small businesses, especially those that are started by today's entrepreneurs, get a good chance to get going. And that means that we'll have to improve small business navigator projects to help businesses get established, to get through the red tape, so to speak, and loan programs those are the kinds of things that can give you the start that you need to get your business going. And we know that small business is a major engine of economic growth in any state, but particularly a state like ours, and particularly for minority entrepreneurs. So we'll be very passionate and very aggressive along those lines. Longer term, we've got some major challenges. Well, I know we're going to talk about K through 12 education in a bit, but in addition to that, we have to make sure that our young people are preparing for the businesses of tomorrow, not the businesses of yesterday. And that means that more and more of our high school graduates need to make sure that they are not stopping at grade 12, but they're continuing on to grades 13, 14, 15, and 16 in some cases, to make sure that they can get the new jobs that are opening. You know, I know that there are many jobs open in Indiana today for which we do not have people qualified to take, because we do not have enough folks who have finished high school, have taken the advanced courses and training that they need in order to run the robots that run the factories in manufacturing, for instance. So, you know, in my day, when you graduated from high school, really all you needed was a strong back to go down to the local factory or foundry and get a job. But today you've got to have more than that. You've got to have a knowledge about how to manage and information technology, how to utilize computer systems. That's required in order to take some of the great jobs that are open in our state. And we just don't have enough folks. We don't have enough kids. We don't have enough people involved in making sure that that happens. And in the Myers-Lawson administration, that will change. And finally, let me say a word about fairness. So we all know that there's not universal fairness in terms of employment out there today. We know that after someone, for instance, has served their time after incarceration, there's discrimination against them based upon the fact that they were incarcerated. And I think that it's time for us to find new and better ways to give people a chance after they've served the time that the state of Indiana has asked them to serve and has monitored them and hopefully given them reason to never ever commit that crime again. It's time to give them a chance to get back in society. And so we're going to incentivize those businesses willing to do that and help them to understand that that helps all of us to make sure that the folks that have served their time get an opportunity to prove that they too now can re-enter society. So that's just a sampling of the kind of approach that we'll take, and we'll be very aggressive about it.
All right, well, you're already touching on some things about, you know, what we can do kind of at the root cause level of employment issues. So we can move to education. In Indiana, 92% of students in the state are enrolled in public schools, and students of color are more likely to attend them. But public schools only received a 2.7% increase in the most recent state budget, while non-public schools received a 25.2% increase during that same time. Indiana public school teachers and administrators, very visibly through protests and other means, requested increases in teacher pay and other support. Could you please address how Indiana can create more equitable funding for schools, and especially those that serve marginalized communities of color?
Well, there are many ways. The first thing we got to do, Dr. Merritt, is listen to teachers. Teachers are on the front lines. Teachers are, their job is to teach. That's what it says in their contracts. But really what they are doing is that they are creating the future for the state of Indiana. And we desperately want them to be successful in that. And so I think we should listen to them. And I was there on November 19th, 2019, when about 20,000 teachers dressed in their red sweaters and hats and scarves and came to the State House to meet with the governor and talk about their concerns. 20,000 people don't get dressed up and come to Indianapolis unless they're serious about a topic. And the teachers that showed up were very serious, as were the ones that didn't, who cheered them on. I know that if I were governor, I would have been there to hear their concerns, to understand those issues that they care about. But my opponent chose to be elsewhere, I believe Florida, at the time that they arrived. I know that we could also listen to their concerns about the obsessive need that some members of our General Assembly have to micromanage their daily activities and teaching to the test that we've mandated in the state of Indiana. Tests, by the way, that have cost many millions of dollars that haven't worked. So clearly, we need to change our thinking about those tests and bring in some folks that understand what's the right way to evaluate the success of school districts that doesn't involve us forcing teachers to do something unnatural. Let's let the teachers do what they were trained to do in the schools of education and teach our students properly. And by the way, this will be the first time that a governor has appointed a superintendent of public instruction. And I will be very, very deliberate in the person that I choose for that role. It's going to be a very, very important appointment. And I'm going to look for somebody who's got great experience, great knowledge about schools, preferably someone who's got Indiana experience, so that we can hit the ground running from the minute that I take the oath of office, because it's going to be an exceptionally challenging, the next 2 years are going to be exceptionally challenging for a variety of reasons. And I want someone who can already speak the language and speak with teachers on a daily basis with ease of communication. And so I think that's going to be vitally important as well. There is a lot that we can do, but the underlying need is to increase the funding that goes into our schools. For the past 15 years, we haven't paid teachers anywhere close to what they deserve. We are the last state in the nation in terms of salary increases for teachers over the past 15 years. And that's just criminal. I mean, we have 980 vacancies, the last I looked, for teachers in the state of Indiana today. We're losing teachers to all of the surrounding states and from the profession altogether. Some of our universities that have been so productive in the past in creating opportunities for new teachers are now down a significant percentage, like Ball State and Indiana State University, compared to previous years. These are all very serious problems that show that the system for K through 12 education in Indiana is quite critically ill and needs to be treated, and it needs to be treated in a very different way than this administration and the previous two administrations have treated it.
So just to clarify the funding differences, we know that the legislative session will be starting up here in the next several months. So is there anything that you would anticipate during that process that you would specifically do to try to support increased funding and reducing that disparity between public school funding and non-public school funding?
Let me be very clear. We have to increase the funding that goes to K through 12 education, period. End of sentence. We have to make sure that more of the state dollars go into education than have gone into it in the past, in past sessions. Yes, there was a bit of an increase in the last session, but that doesn't make up for the previous 15 years. That's like giving somebody who's very hungry a couple slices of bread. Yeah, those slices of bread feel pretty good, but that doesn't make up for the starvation that's gone on for that long period of time. And so we're going to have to be very deliberate about making sure that we make our teachers whole, so that we encourage new people to enter the profession. We make sure that folks that are in the profession today are getting what they need in order to support their families. They are creating the future of the state of Indiana, and we haven't treated them as we should.
Well, let's transition to a different topic. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, Jacob Blake. Those are just a few of the more recent invisible cases of Black citizens who've been killed or seriously injured by law enforcement. Studies tell us that Black Americans are more likely to be killed by the police and be disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system. Do you believe that there's a culture that allows for systemic racism in law enforcement? And could you clarify what you would do specifically to address those experiences if you were elected governor?
Yes, I believe there is. And I believe that there are an unfortunate number of law enforcement officers who truly should not be in the profession. And we've seen clear-cut evidence of that. The good news is that's a small minority of the officers that are trying to protect us and provide for public safety. But it's a significant group that has had that has wreaked significant havoc on our society. And in Indiana, we're not immune from that at all. We've had incidents here as well, so we can make a great deal of progress, which is why I believe we need criminal justice reform in Indiana. I would immediately allocate funding for both dash cams and body cams. In addition to that, we need oversight when an officer has been accused of egregious or behavior or policy violations, to make sure that the evaluation process has external oversight to give people confidence that it was done properly. I think it's time for us to institute implicit bias training for all the law enforcement officers in Indiana. I think that the research has shown very clearly that we have biases that we don't know about. All of us do, and we need to recognize them and manage them so that when we behave differently before one type of person or one color person than another, then we are recognizing that that's going on, and we are able to interrupt that behavior and do something about it. But without understanding it, the likelihood of us addressing it is very, very low. In addition, I believe very strongly that we need to go back to community policing, as we have talked about in previous years. That means that police officers, we should encourage them to get out of their vehicles and be a part of the neighborhood, to be a part of those activities that go on in the neighborhood. And I know that many officers do that today, but we need to be quite deliberate in making sure that even more are in that mode. And I would like for us to increase our recruitment of women and minorities to law enforcement in addition to that. And one more, I think that it's time for us to change the way we think about cannabis, marijuana in Indiana. It's time for us to decriminalize simple possession. And that means small amounts of cannabis. All the other states are moving in that direction. I do believe it is time for us to now also legalize marijuana for medical purposes in the state. I've read the research. I understand that for certain diseases like anorexia, wasting syndrome with respect to HIV/AIDS, certain complex seizure disorders, that it can have a very beneficial effect. And that applies to all the cannabinoids, not just THC, but CBD as well. And so it's time for us to move in that direction. I'm not yet ready to say that we should go to recreational marijuana. I think that there are many issues that are still outstanding that need to be addressed by the Food and Drug Administration that haven't adequately been addressed yet. But I do think it's time for us to take the big step of decriminalization for simple possession and medical legalization.
And so how would you plan on working with the state legislature on some of those issues, given that you're bringing up some big topics that might, create some gridlock? So how would you plan to engage them on these issues?
Carefully and collaboratively. I think that this is what leadership is all about. It's understanding the other person's point of view, understanding the goal, and finding the best ways to move from A to B. And I've had many years of experience in doing that in a variety of companies. I've been on a number of boards. I've been the CEO of a company. I've been the chief medical officer of a number of Blue Cross plans across the nation. So all of those experiences in the public and the private and the not-for-profit sector have, I think, prepared me well to be collaborative and to disagree with someone without being disagreeable, to understand the other person's point of view, and to find ways to negotiate a consensus. That's what you have to do in government, and that's what I would want to do in the legislature. And that's what I did when I was the Indiana State Health Commissioner. When I was a health commissioner, I was a Democrat in a Republican administration under Governor Orr at first, followed by Governor Bai. And I was also worked in a legislative setting that had the Democrats leading the House of Representatives and the Senate being led by Republicans. And you know what? We got things done. We got legislation passed. We did the right thing for Hoosiers. We cooperated. We prioritized what's best for Indiana. And that's the kind of spirit that I would like to engender again. We have too much division today. We don't have enough folks that want to roll up their sleeves and get the right things done. We have far too much polarization, and I'll do my absolute best to make sure that doesn't continue to happen.
Thank you. I think we have time for about one more question, if you'll have it. So wrapping up, nationally in Indiana, Black Americans are least likely to be homeowners and are more likely to rent and experience homelessness. And this is due to decades of housing discrimination and segregation. The CDC says that stable housing is a vital tool to control the coronavirus in particular because it allows residents to shelter in place, work and learn from home when possible. An eviction moratorium was initially granted and then was let to expire in Indiana to ensure renters could have stable housing during the pandemic. So if you were elected, what would your plan be for Indiana residents who are experiencing housing instability, and especially those who are going to continue to experience that due to the after effects of COVID-19?
Well, you've got about an hour's worth of issues in that one question, Dr. Merritt.
Very true.
Let me try as best I can. Within the Black community, we need to build generational wealth. That's the key underlying issue, that we're always operating at seemingly on the margin. There's far too many of us that are living paycheck to paycheck. We've got to generate generational wealth, and that means that we have to become entrepreneurial. We have to make sure that our kids are finishing school, prioritizing education, and doing all we can to create savings. Those are the kinds of things that I'm going to encourage, and that we'll put programs in place to help Hoosiers move forward with, because that's what it's going to take longer term. For us to quit this notion of to cease this notion of being the statistic that's always at the bottom. We've got to change our thinking as a society and become much more fair as a society. And that's something that I will be very, very vocal on as the next governor of the state. In addition, I can't stress enough the need for additional job training, additional opportunities to bring workforce development opportunities I just know that we have an incredible array of different components in our economy. We're not overly dependent on manufacturing or agriculture or service. We have all of those and more in our state. And so I will be someone who will look to incentivize growth in each one of those areas. And I think that too will assist African Americans in our state. With respect to the eviction issue, we need to extend the moratorium on evictions for a longer period of time. We need to extend our federal government payments through the CARES Act to help with the utility bills and for those that are unable to afford them in the interim period of time, because winter is here and we all know what can happen in Indiana during the winter. We don't want to evict people. We don't want folks having their heat turned off in the ensuing months. And folks that will say, well, you know, that's just not fair. So, well, it's a public health emergency. And in emergencies, you do things differently. And government is supposed to lead the way to protect the citizens. That's the number one job of government, protect the public. And if you don't utilize your reserves, if you don't make changes to accommodate what people need during an emergency, when do you do it? Why have a rainy day fund if you're not going to use it when there's a global pandemic? So now's the time to carefully assess where the most difficult needs are and meet them. And I would put folks losing their housing, folks losing their health care, folks losing their utilities at the top of my list. And that'll be a priority for us until we get to the point where we have an effective, safe and effective vaccine. And I'm sure that President Biden and Vice President Harris are going to appoint a new director for the Centers for Disease Control, a new leader of the FDA, who will get in there on day one and start reviewing the data from the companies, including great companies like Eli Lilly, who are working very hard every day to create the treatments and the vaccines that we need to get this pandemic under control, so that we can get closer to what we used to have. We're never going to return completely 100% to the way that we were before, but we're going to get much closer than we are today with a safe and effective vaccine. And as the next governor, I'll make sure that it's equitably distributed, and I'll make sure that we're telling the people of our state why they need to take it and the importance of making sure that immunity is present.
Well, Thank you, Dr. Myers. I know that was a loaded question, so I appreciate you trying to address multiple prongs of that. So thank you again for your time spending with us today and responding to a litany of questions. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Ms. Stephanie Terry to wrap us up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What a great discussion. Thank you so much. We appreciate the information shared tonight that will help us as voters make an informed decision this election. Thank you to our moderators and Governor Eric Holcomb and Dr. Woody Myers for your participation tonight. Listening audience, your vote is your voice. Make plans to vote early or on November 3rd. To vote by mail, submit your application by October 22nd. On behalf of the State of Indiana chapters of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, Indiana chapter of the NAACP, and the African American Coalition of Indianapolis, good night, and remember, there is power in our voice.